Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Programmatic Ad Trends to Watch for 2024. Live from our New York studio, I'm your host, Ross Benish, Senior Analyst at Insider Intelligence. I'm joined by my colleague, Senior Analyst Evelyn Mitchell-Wolf, who's in Virginia. Hey, Evelyn, good to have you.
Hey, Ross. Thanks. I'm so excited.
Before we get into the main presentation, I'd like to thank T-Mobile Advertising Solutions for making today's webinar possible, and welcome Kevin McGurn, Vice President of Sales, Marketing, and Distribution at T-Mobile Advertising Solutions. Kevin is joining us from New York. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Ross. Thanks for having me.
So a few things before we dive in. We have a ton of information to share, but there's no need to take notes. We'll email you with the link to the slides and a recording of the presentation. We would love for you to engage with us in the chat throughout the show and to hear your thoughts and predictions for 2024 and any questions you may have. So use the chat window on the right of your screen to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A later on. So with that, Evelyn, let's get started.
Thanks so much, Ross. Today, we will be covering a few of the most important trends shaping programmatic ad spending next year. They center around addressability, ad tech, and AI, and I will wrap with a few actionable takeaways before we hear from Kevin. I want to take a moment to set the stage here with a quick look at how the programmatic landscape has evolved over the past decade. We updated our programmatic ad spending forecast just last week, so you're getting super fresh data today. In 2013, almost 2/3 of programmatic ad spending went to desktop and laptop computers. By 2023, that not only does mobile have a more comfortable lead over desktop and laptop, we have added another device category to the mix. Surprising nobody, CTV has come in with full force. And it's grown so fast that it actually overtook desktop laptop this year. So over the past decade, programmatic has gotten both more diverse and more mobile dominated. The trends that we'll talk about today have big implications for 2024, yes, but also big implications for the next decade of programmatic advertising. So let's dive in. First up, addressability. The top level trend here is that advertisers are finally dusting off their conversations around cookieless alternatives with their programmatic partners. Since browsers and operating systems began phasing out support for legacy third-party identifiers, a plethora of identity solutions have been brought to market by stakeholders across the supply chain. Bless Prohaska Consulting for putting this graphic together, because it's a lot. Over 110 individual solutions are listed here. But after Google first announced it would deprecate third-party cookies in Chrome back in January 2020, there was an initial flurry of preparation, but ultimately urgency died down, and only now are comprehensive tests really starting to get off the ground. It's important to note that Chrome is the last major browser to support third-party cookies. Firefox and Safari abandoned them long ago at this point. But for better or worse, cookie deprecation in Chrome has been treated as the industry's deadline for getting its cookieless act together. And there's a lot of skepticism that this deadline will indeed come to pass in 2024 or at all. Since Google's initial announcement, it has pushed the timeline twice, once in June 2021 and again in July 2022, hence the title of this slide. And according to a survey conducted this summer by ID5, a third of advertising stakeholders worldwide believe Google will delay it again. It's no surprise then that as recent as Q3 of this year, 33 across observed most programmatic ad spending going to cookied inventory across verticals. And I've seen plenty of other data suggesting a lack of readiness for this change. But barring regulatory intervention, Google's timeline won't budge again. It has a concrete roadmap in place. As of September, its privacy sandbox protocols are generally available for testing. This quarter, Chrome has started facilitating opt-in tests that simulate cookie deprecation. Then in January 2024, the cookie apocalypse officially begins. Chrome will deprecate third-party cookies for 1% of global users, and the axe will fall in the second half of the year.
Hey, Evelyn, how likely do you think it is that Google will delay this again?
Okay, it's a good question. Google is very unlikely to push its target date past 2024. To my mind, it's one thing to postpone a vague and distant deadline, but with antitrust regulators breathing down Google's neck, making such a move now would show vulnerability in a way that I don't think Google wants to, especially after receiving an unfavorable verdict in an antitrust trial brought by Epic Games just a few days ago. Google's just not likely to take on any additional risk. It even posted on the Chrome blog today, reiterating that it will indeed move forward with the next stage of the deprecation process in January. So unless the UK's Competition and Markets Authority declares the privacy sandbox insufficient to preserve a diverse and competitive market, I think Google's going to stay the course with its current timeline. I'd give it maybe like a 1 in 10 chance that it delays it again. What do you think, Ross?
Well, I don't think they'll delay it again, but I would probably say the chances are a little higher than 1 in 10. I'd expect kind of a slow rollout. They have a lot going on, and they've already delayed it a few times. And I don't think advertisers would be too sad if they kick the can down the road, not a year or two, but maybe a few months.
I'd venture to guess, actually, there would be a sigh of relief heard round the world if they delayed it again. But there's some good news, regardless of whether this timeline sticks where it is, and that's that there are some definite signs of progress. Winterberry Group estimates how much money companies invest in identity solutions and services each year, and that number has continued to go up despite that lack of urgency that I mentioned earlier. It's actually more than tripled over the past 5 years. So what should advertisers expect going forward? Well, for one thing, more contextual solutions. And this is nothing new. Advertisers have already been investing in contextual. As deterministic consumer data has deteriorated, contextual signals have taken on fresh importance. And when Proximic surveyed US marketers in March, over half of respondents said they expected to increase their use of contextual data this year. And the contextual renaissance, if you will, is fueling renewed interest in metadata and taxonomy in the programmatic bid stream, because the success of contextual strategies hinges on accurate information that is universally interpretable throughout the bid stream. So when every publisher tags or categorizes its content differently, it makes even simple contextual targeting a lot less versatile. And when real-time bidding is involved, it's simply impractical to adapt one's contextual strategy to each and every publisher's unique tagging system. But contextual, for all its advantages, will not sustain programmatic on its own. It will be enhanced with AI and used alongside a variety of behavioral tactics to achieve optimal outcomes for advertisers that are operating in a vibrant and diverse programmatic ecosystem. Speaking of which, let's talk about ad tech. This is the tech that undergirds the whole shebang here. So we're going to work our way backwards from the outcome for this one. Ad tech is long overdue for a cycle of consolidation. Luma Partners tracks ad tech mergers and acquisitions, and we can see that deal volume is still down compared with the historic highs of 2021. And if we plot interest rates, it's clear that high interest rates have chilled M&A activity. But as conditions improve, a confluence of trends will drive consolidation in 2024 and beyond. So we have 3 trends to go through for this. The first is advertisers seeking more transparency and control over their programmatic supply chains. So this means that SPO, or supply path optimization, is more than a buzzword. It's a tool. And as more advertisers employ it and more ad tech vendors productize it, the lines between buy and sell side ad tech are blurring. So I'll give you a few prominent examples of ad tech initiatives that bring buyers and sellers closer together. First is the Trade Desk's Open Path. And then we also have Magnite's Clearline, which focuses on video and CTV inventory. And as advertisers opt to invest more with partners that provide better pricing, data, inventory curation, supply-side platforms are especially vulnerable to disruption. For example, there's another initiative from the Trade Desk that will likely send ripples throughout the programmatic ecosystem. This is an August headline from Ad Exchanger when the Trade Desk announced that it would start submitting bids below sellers' floor prices, which will put pressure on SSPs to minimize their take rates or risk losing clients. And this comes at a time when publishers are already reevaluating their SSP partnerships in the wake of clawbacks after MediaMath's bankruptcy. And SSPs are doing, what they can to mitigate risk of being disintermediated, but it's tough to do without eating into their margins. And across the supply chain, ad tech vendors are having to strengthen and expand their capabilities to ensure their fees are defensible to buyers. And for some players, that means M&A. The second trend here is that cost cutting born out of the last year and a half of economic uncertainty will linger, even as ad spending rebounds. Advertisers aren't just going to let go of the efficiencies that they found over the last 18 months or so. Now, working media, that is the money that publishers actually see once ad tech intermediaries take their fees, that is growing healthily, and growth will accelerate in 2024, which is always heartening to see, especially after a tough year for publishers and really everyone. But advertisers will continue to pursue lower or at least more justifiable fees from their programmatic partners. So the ad tech tax, as it's commonly called, will hover at around 42% of real-time bidding, programmatic ad spending. And for the next few years, that'll be the case. And as buyers continue to chase those efficiencies, competition will heat up among ad tech vendors. And as a result, they will diversify their offerings by partnering with or even acquiring firms that have already developed innovative tech that can help them differentiate their market offering. The third and final trend is cookie deprecation. Will also drive ad tech consolidation, and it won't be immediate, but as the dust settles, not all programmatic partners will stand the test of time. So most identity providers will fold or be absorbed. There are more than 110 solutions out there, right? And that is just not sustainable. And a deterministic identifier's effectiveness is predicated on scale. So IDs that don't get enough traction, they're not going to last long once third-party cookies are gone. And the smaller providers that have high-quality data or really great tech or methodology may get acquired. Data brokers will suffocate. Any business model that is based on unconsented, personally identifiable information is unsustainable in the new privacy-focused era. Take California's Delete Act as an example. In case anyone is unfamiliar with the Delete Act, it enables Californians to make a single personal information deletion request to a centralized database that is binding to all data brokers. So any data brokers that operate in the state of California, if a resident requests that their data is removed from that centralized database, they have to observe that. So legislation like this, it will likely proliferate. Data brokers are not particularly popular among legislators or among consumers. And as that legislation does proliferate, it will make it even more difficult for data brokers to survive. Vendors with undifferentiated tech will also lose business once cookies meet their maker, as it were. Buyers and sellers are searching for partners that bring value beyond simply facilitating a transaction. And some vendors may respond to that demand by marketing artificial differentiators around privacy compliance. Sustainability is another big one, or maybe diversity, like supporting Black-owned media outlets. All of those advertisers should keep an eye out for to make sure that claims are supported with data and with case studies, so that they are doing business with partners that they share values with. All right, last but certainly not least, we have to talk about AI, because how could we not? AI is about to disrupt advertising supply and demand in profound ways. It'll make some things worse and some things better. So let's start with the bad news, shall we? Quality display inventory will get harder to come by, or rather, ad placements on high-quality, trusted publications will account for a significantly smaller portion of available inventory. Why? Because the made-for-advertising problem is about to get orders of magnitude worse. And I do want to mention that MFA websites are not problematic simply because they are MFA websites, because they're made for advertising. MFA websites often resort to high ad density, pop-ups, autoplays, frequent ad refreshing, and all. They do that to generate as much ad revenue as possible. But none of those things is really a hallmark of a great user experience. And when user experience isn't a high priority, or when a publisher's business model doesn't rely on nurturing a loyal audience base, that publisher has no reason not to produce content using generative AI with little to no human oversight. Those publishers can afford to disregard the trade-off in user experience, because the user experience is already poor to begin with. So we have some data from the ANA's recent transparency report that gives us an idea of how much ad spending MFA websites represent. From September 2022 to January 2023, 1 in 5 observed impressions were on MFA websites, equating to 15% of ad spending. That is $18.5 million, or somewhere in the realm of $4 million per month of the study. And that's not chump change, especially not for smaller advertisers. This is just a snapshot. Mind you, it's a snapshot of a very small portion of the digital advertising market taken before generative AI had become as accessible as it is today. So it only gets worse from here, unless advertisers create and reinforce incentives for publishers and ad tech providers to filter out MFA inventory, because current incentive structures are actually contributing to the problem. Ad tech providers get a cut of the transaction regardless of impression quality. And when a brand is promised low CPMs, chances are high that MFA or other low quality inventory is used to deflate average costs. And even high quality publishers face an existential threat in AI. They're already seeing less traffic from social media, and traffic will likely take another huge hit as generative search tools roll out to general audiences, rendering click-throughs largely unnecessary. Chatbot interfaces for search engines are designed to answer complex user queries that would usually result in the user clicking on one or more links. And and smaller monetizable audiences would be a pretty big problem for publishers and for advertisers alike.
I just want to make one point there, Evelyn, with AI, that it isn't just the MFA problem, as you pointed out, with high quality publishers. I would say there's some really well-known publishers who are devaluing themselves a little bit with AI. Sports Illustrated is one that comes to mind. Now, they aren't what they used to be by any means, but they recently had a scandal where they had articles written using AI, and they had bylines to those articles, but there wasn't actually a human who wrote them. So their CEO ended up getting ousted. And for advertisers who are concerned about risk, when you see a publisher using AI in a significant way, you need to pay close attention to how they're using it.
Absolutely. I think it's all, I mean, the word you use there, risk, I think it's all about risk tolerance and understanding, what's new about the marketplace, but really also having a North Star in the brand internally of what you are willing to risk, and then keeping an ear close to the ground to understand what's going on at publishers that you trust, or that where your audience would typically spend their time. So just keep an eye out for that and understand exactly what your risk threshold is. Okay, so this has been the bad news. Let's move on to the good news, shall we? Machine learning will empower advertisers with better targeting and measurement. And how's it going to do that? Well, identity resolution will get a boost because AI is being built into advanced probabilistic solutions that connect various deterministic sets of data, and then fill in the gaps where necessary, so they can take some small known or logged in audiences, as publishers might refer to them, and help get to those unknown audiences. Also, analytics will be democratized. So personalized reporting and natural language queries will allow more people that don't have data science backgrounds to generate insights that'll give them more information that they can use to do their jobs better. And then it will also free up bandwidth for data scientists to apply their skills elsewhere. But creative production will see the biggest benefits from machine learning and AI. Basis Technologies surveyed US marketers about which digital marketing processes they expected would be most impacted by generative AI, and content creation was far and away the most popular response. Automated content production and optimization will supercharge personalization efforts and allow better resource allocation. For example, talent can focus on developing smart creative concepts rather than tweaking the copy for specific audiences or reformatting ads to fit various dimensions. And that can save a lot of time and really open up new doors for a lot of brands. Okay, I have a few actionable takeaways for you, and then I'll hand the virtual mic back to Ross and Kevin. So how can advertisers get the most out of their programmatic strategies in 2024? First and foremost, please sort your post-cookie strategy now. Don't wait for Google. Even if cookie deprecation in Chrome gets pushed back again, it would be a stay of execution, not a pardon. So use the absence of third-party cookies on other major browsers to source a foundation of insight and build a testing strategy. Dabble in the privacy sandbox. You don't want to be caught without a flashlight when they do turn out the lights. Second, be choosy about your programmatic partners. The landscape will look very different a few years from now, and some ad tech vendors won't exist for very much longer. So thoroughly vetting new relationships and auditing existing ones could potentially save you a massive headache, not to mention money. And finally, keep a very close eye on inventory quality. As generative AI gets more accessible, expertly crafted content will account for an ever smaller portion of the internet. So like I said, determine your risk tolerance and your brand suitability thresholds now so that if or when a problem arises, you can consider all your options. So you can consider using inclusion lists or a more robust, always on contextual targeting strategy that potentially leverages AI, maybe attention metrics. There are options out there. You just have to be aware that you might need to use them. All right. So that's all from me for now. Back to you, Ross.
Thanks, Evelyn. That was great. And before we get into your questions, we've had some really good ones, so please keep them coming. I'd like to welcome our guest, Kevin McGurn, Vice President of Sales, Marketing, and Distribution at T-Mobile Advertising Solutions. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks again, Ross.
So, Kevin, how do you see programmatic device and channel diversity changing over the next decade?
So I think there's a big opportunity in our industry to create programmatic efficiencies for the buyers in our market. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth, as Evelyn pointed out, in the connected television business. I think there's huge opportunities there, and also in digital out of home to consolidate kind of one-stop shops to layer data over disparate sets of inventory and create programmatic efficiencies when we go to deliver. But most of all, I think the United States has a little bit to catch up here. There's been a great amount of adoption around the world because those markets are more disparate, fragmented, and harder to reach. And programmatic is the rule, not the exception in those markets. And I think here in the US, we're going to start to see that grow more and more because the agencies and the advertisers themselves need to have efficient ways to buy more inventory and to reach more audiences. And the programmatic landscape can deliver upon that, but it needs to be done in an efficient and effective way using data-informed targetability.
So with that, you talk about targetability. How is T-Mobile Ad Solutions focusing on cookieless alternatives?
Yeah, it's a place in the industry where we think we're going to make a big impact. Obviously, we have a very large customer base that we're actioning upon and getting opt-in data from. We think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to put that data on top of inventory that we have owned and operated access to, as well as third-party access to. So we're looking in the landscape and saying, okay, these are the largest parts of growth in our media industry. And really today, that's in video and connected television and in digital out of home, where we're going to focus. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in 2024, starting in CAS and moving beyond. But we're really focused on having efficient ways for marketers to get to inventory in places in walled gardens that has been very hard to access. Buying by platform, I don't think is the right answer. It's too narrow. If you can buy broadly across platform and using efficient ways to target, I think that is the answer that marketers are looking for and will get them to spend more money more quickly in our industry.
So Evelyn noted that it's been a slow few years lately for ad tech mergers and acquisitions. Do you see that continuing next year?
I do think you're going to have consolidation. I think you have to see an accelerated marketplace for these companies to come together. Those walled gardens are really interesting opportunities for companies to go place to place and actually have their rates of adoption, their certifications to operate inside those inventory sets. The ones that are largest and have the more ubiquitous distribution to play with, I think will be the ones that get aggregated the most. So, for us, we look at partnering with everyone and see how that landscape shakes out. And then ultimately, we know where the winners will be. And our data will have the largest match rates across all of those winners, so we can present that back to marketers in an efficient way.
So with retail media, do you see that taking a larger piece of programmatic ad spend?
Without question, I think there's such a huge opportunity in retail media. Today, it's really digital retail media, but I think there's also a bigger opportunity in place-based retail media. Looking at all of the disparate screens that we can see across the digital out-of-home landscape, both out of store and in store, and really building out opportunities for people to have targeting, have efficiency, have delivery at high rates. Where today, again, it's a very hard inventory set to access. And if you can get down to that last mile or even those last 3 feet where the transaction's about to take place, having data that sits over top of that and then having feedback from a measurement standpoint where you can have SKU level data feedback to you that products were actually sold. I think that's a really interesting spot for anyone to play in, and it's something that you'll probably see from us as well in 2024.
All right, so let's shift focus a little bit, talk about CTV. You've mentioned that a few times, so did Evelyn. We forecast CTV is going to account for about 15% of total US programmatic ad spend. What do you make of those figures?
I think it's too low. I think this business needs to innovate a little bit more quickly. I think the access to programmatic inventory needs to be opened up. It needs to go across those sort of walled gardens. Today, you really have to go house to house and buy both direct and programmatically. And I think there needs to be more of a marketplace across the board. And whether you're buying by platform or by network or looking at inventory sets and layering data on top of them to a buy addressable, the programmatic landscape has to grow because there's a supply chain issue in the agency world and in the marketer world. We don't have enough people working at these places to actually do these things with hands on keyboard. We need a lot more automation, and we need to get those folks, efficiencies that procurement departments at major marketers will approve. And I think that's going to be one of the things that you'll see in 2024 and beyond. But again, kind of comparing the US to international markets, the US has some catching up to do. We really need to move into programmatic much more quickly. And we need to allow ourselves the ability to grow with those levels of automation. And I don't see programmatic as anything that's bottom of the barrel or efficient or even just direct response. It really is automation. And these could be very, very premium audience sets and premium inventory sets that are transacted on, but done so in an efficient way with automation.
How do you think advertisers can get the most out of their programmatic strategies 2024?
First and foremost, I think they have to use data because otherwise you're not going to know exactly what you're getting. You have to put buys in place where you feel confident that you're eliminating waste. And that's something that we're really working hard here at T-Mobile to do, to unlock our first party data, get those opt-ins, and really start to profile out using synthetic data and project into audiences where we're giving efficiencies to marketers who are trying to find their audiences that are going to buy, that are going to go from the top of the funnel all the way down to purchase. And you really have to use those data-informed targets. Otherwise, you're shooting in the dark.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Now it's time to get into our audience Q&A. We've received a lot of great questions, so I'm just going to get right to them. The first one is, will walled gardens fare better than the open web once cookies are deprecated?
Well, that's a good question. Walled gardens and other direct pathways certainly have the advantage when it comes to behavioral targeting. Publishers and platforms that have broad reach and direct user relationships have kind of a built-in barrier against signal loss. But they aren't completely immune to disruption. Just want to be clear about that. Walled gardens like Meta they're beginning to reckon with legal restrictions on their ad-funded business models in Europe, and there's a lot to be seen about how that plays out. But yes, walled gardens do have an advantage when it comes to behavioral targeting with a mass amount of consumer data from logged in audiences. But the open web is also fighting back, I would say, or ad tech vendors that operate primarily on the open web are fighting back, and they're trying to pool resources and make this transition as easy as possible. So I do think that, in terms of resources, walled gardens are sitting fairly pretty. They have the higher ground once cookies are deprecated. But don't count the open web out, I would say.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is I think the walled gardens in mobile and open web are definitely going to be beneficiaries of it. But in connected television, the audience sets are still small enough where any one platform isn't meaningful to an advertiser. They don't create that level of reach. So you end up getting just a lot of frequency against even a very finite target if you're hitting someone that you're looking for. So I do believe that there's a combination of a little bit of opportunity in that world of connected television and some risk for consolidation for those CTV providers that are out there that just don't reach that level of scale to make any amount of data a big volume opportunity when you get those match rates.
So the next question might make some of the companies on the LUMAscape slightly anxious. The question is, will all third-party partners be non-existent in the next few years?
That's a big question. I applaud whoever asked it for their guts, because it's a little scary. But I mean, from my point of view, I think there is absolutely a role for what is currently known as third-party data in the programmatic ecosystem moving forward. I just think it's going to have to go by a different name, second-party data. There are going to need to be I don't know how intimate the partnerships need to be, but they're going to need to be partnerships in place between advertisers and data providers, closer partnerships than currently exist under the third-party cookie infrastructure that make use of that data, provided it is consented data, viable in a privacy-centric legislative landscape in the future. So maybe that might be hedging a little bit to say that third-party data providers will become second-party data providers, but I think they'll still exist. They'll just be going by a different name.
Okay. This next question is a little broad, so take whichever piece of it you believe is most relevant. It says, how will new programmatic media options, such as digital out-of-home, cinema, radio, etc., fare in the future?
It's a good question. And I mean, I think generally the future is programmatic. So, I mean, hopefully that's kind of a blanket statement that can apply to everything I'm about to say. But there's a very promising future where as data-driven advertising gets more common and kind of the infrastructure gets built out, especially, you know, once cookies are deprecated and the ecosystem adapts to just being a little bit more agile with the different signals that can be used to infuse campaigns and strategy with more data. All of that kind of lends itself to programmatic advertising in any channel in which it exists. So programmatic digital out of home is one of the really interesting channels. I find it just in terms of it's a unique consumer touch point, so I find it especially interesting. And we do see, you know, that trend is going up and to the right. It's going in the right direction. Obviously, over the course of the past year, with some volatility in the macroeconomic stability being what it is, things are still going up. So we do see there being programmatic making up for a larger percentage of all of these, the channels that you mentioned. Wherever programmatic exists, it is on the ascent. It might not be super fast for everything to be programmatic, but that is, you know, if we project out 50 years in the future, I would expect there to be a very significant portion of those markets transacted programmatically.
Yeah, I think if you look at the screens where digital out of home is being utilized today, and you solve for a couple unique issues, which is connectivity, and then kind of the smart TVs and the CMS and the centralized ad serving that will play into all of those screens, you're going to have a high level of growth for programmatic fill of that inventory. So that's someplace obviously we think we can play very organically and authentically there, and we'll have a lot more to talk about in 2024. But this is going to be a much smarter landscape for digital out of home, and programmatic is the smart way to buy those landscapes.
All right, the next question is, how will first-party data factor into post-cookie addressability?
It's going to be a huge component. In fact, activating on first-party data is the cookieless solution that advertisers and publishers think holds the greatest promise, according to research from DoubleVerify. And I'm sorry, I can't put the chart up on the slide for you all on the fly here, but that's a figure that I find myself coming back to frequently. In order to activate first-party data, though, at least deterministically, there has to be an ID graph that can act as kind of a translation layer between that first-party data and the publisher. So whether we're operating in an open web or in a walled garden, that ID layer has to be there. And first-party data can also be analyzed for insight into a brand's audience that can help inform contextual or persona-based targeting. So first-party data is going to be a really important part of the ecosystem moving forward. It is not a silver bullet. So first-party data by itself, there's just not enough scale for it to support the entire weight of the programmatic ecosystem all on its own. But it's a huge, huge factor in post-cookie addressability.
Yeah, I couldn't support that enough. I think you have to start with first-party data. That is the solution that you start with, but then you use really smart artificial intelligence to project that data out and find scale. And that's where you're getting audience profiles that marketers want. They don't want personally identifiable information. They want broad-based scale because that's how you sell the most products to the most customers.
All right, so this is our last question that we have time for today. What's the outlook for programmatic ad spending in 2024?
Good question. And again, our new forecast is very fresh. So forgive me if I don't have the exact figures top of mind memorized quite yet. But I do know that we did increase our forecast over the previous update to that package. Not a ton, so slight adjustment, but it is our programmatic forecast is connected to our digital ad spending forecast, which did get a slight boost this time. So that is a good news for advertisers, publishers, everybody. Growth will accelerate next year. That's exciting. And growth in programmatic digital display ad spending will outpace top-line digital display ad spending as usual, just owing to the flexibility that programmatic provides. It's also good news, I would say, for the market. And then also another interesting insight is that a lot of growth will be driven by CTV. Probably not a surprise for anyone. It is a really hot market, but it's always good to be aware of what is driving that growth, especially as we head into re-acceleration of growth next year.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thanks again to Evelyn for joining us for our last analyst-led webinar of the year. And a very special thanks to Kevin and to the team at T-Mobile Advertising Solutions. Our Studio II crew and the eMarketer production team also deserve a huge thanks for making this webinar possible. Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to tell you what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for more live analyst and tech talk webinars in the new year on our events page at eMarketer.com/events. On the audio side of the house, don't forget to tune into our podcast, Behind the Numbers. And finally, please check out our newsletters. Thanks for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.